Hi, my name's Ryan. I work for Lamp Magazine, and this is Lamp Reviews. Today I'll be reviewing this book, EGGPLANT by Ogden Nesmer. Warning, this video contains spoilers. And what can be said about this book that hasn't already been said? Somewhat of a lit standard in the realm of anonymous, at least on 4chan. EGGPLANT has decidedly made its mark, popping up in about every gratuitous meta-referential meme on Lit, and by extension dubbing Nesmer a kind of de facto author laureate for that scene, in my opinion. Although published somewhat later than the original stripe of self-published books that hailed from 4chan's literature board, EGGPLANT marked a watershed moment in the board's culture that shone a light on the now conspicuous writing on the wall. If you write it, they will come. And the stuff with which Nesmer built his first novel is of no diminutive consequence. Its dire characters, its enigmatic setting, ultimately the storytelling that gives the book life, all down to the fateful publication of this work, a very niche cult classic, if you will. Iconic, maybe. And setting small fire to the tinder that would soon after become a movement unto itself. Ogden Nesmer is the chief authority concerning whatever it is we self-published authors take pride in, himself very near to the exact center of such affairs. And I was, and of course still am, proud to have serialized parts of EGGPLANT in Lamp Magazine, my first introduction to Nesmer and his novel. I'll always relish the chance to showcase his work. Nesmer is a gracious artist and a very decent human, two virtues that will serve to bolster his successes, no doubt. I consider his influence in this little corner of the internet to be significant, and he is an invaluable element to the scene's widest effort. But enough about that, since I'm here to review the book. And check it out. The first thing I notice is the cover. Very cool design. Like I mentioned, iconic maybe. I have two copies, as you can well see. My first copy of EGGPLANT is absolutely destroyed, war-torn even. The story inside, however, perfectly intact. The themes of the story are the real gems here, and if at times those themes find less than perfect articulation in the narrative, I forgive the author's trespasses. His prose I'll get to momentarily. The themes of EGGPLANT may also serve to lend it wider acceptance as lit standard. Its existential perspective on writing, on art more generally, should broaden the book's appeal and find resonance among self-published authors, I think. The urge to write about a writer must have proven too great for Nesmer, a call all writers face, even great ones. So what Nesmer's characters and themes have to say on his behalf should faithfully expand on the concept of writing, and I believe in some respects they have. Our story involves Arda, a young writer witness to the slow emaciation of her own potential, measuring herself critically against those around her who might have found even traces of greatness in their tireless, often absorbing work. I can almost see her spell it out for me, the reader. Sometimes the most noble thing you can do as an artist is a commission, capturing somebody else's vision, somebody else's greatness. Real artists just end up working for the rich. Arda's friend Gabby demonstrates just how heavy that pound of flesh can be when making sacrifices in the name of art. And much of the early novel initiates us into Nesmer's thematic banter, musings on the subject of capital A art. Ruminations sometimes still only partially digested or sophomoric in their depth, expounded by caricatures of the art world, heady, nebulous folk. At times perhaps these conversations read like conversations from a generation previous, where, in the end, we all agreed that art is whatever you can get away with. Sometimes a paycheck, too. And this demands from us, who are at least attempting to read between the lines, the mustering of an answer. What is ultimate art? Is it not life and death itself? Arda exhibits her morality in the face of some very utilitarian approaches to degenerative performance art, as if there are actual people beneath these performances, perhaps even feelings within these people. The art portrayed in EGGPLANT itself is caricaturized, even to the point of cringe. From the scenesters and their opinions, to Lil Dirty Boy's opening number, to Lynn's bargain bin art trope of pouring paint over naked people, to our villain's ultimate occupation, all seemingly set in a filter meant to separate the reader further yet, almost like a movie within a movie, where everything is exaggerated, a dimension removed from the audience. I especially enjoy the reference to an artist whose medium was piss. He worked extensively in urine. That's funny. Nesmer does this on purpose. He doesn't actually believe these hipster maxims or portraits to be clever or profound, but mostly is setting up a character drama by letting the reader put their hands on some very flat surfaces, simple and blunt characters against which to sharpen and sculpt our protagonist. Looking over the book in retrospect, I will say that Nesmer has a penchant for attributing just the right amount of dynamism to his main character relative to her importance in the narrative, and I appreciate the stupid heads that the main character encounters, if at all for the opportunity to introduce us to her nuances. And Arda's insight does deepen as the story continues. Consider this: life is just another Boolean. There is much ado made here of writing as a career, or even as an undertaking, that need not to have been said, ideas that perhaps seem a bit shallow for a character to whom so much consideration thereof had apparently been afforded. However, I believe Nesmer is not trying to solve new ground on writing, but rather reiterate some basics so that we can consider his final themes, those of the limits of art. Arda takes a job on behalf of Johnny Lynn and his strange inner circle, a man for whom she was documentarian or biographer, to some degree at least, a very special and mysterious job indeed. 4,000 words at $1.25 each, plus a trip to Micronesia. Somewhat of an unbelievable commission, but thus all the stranger. And for what but the juiciest of scoops, an interview with murderer/artist, Fevzi Goshen. Fevzi Goshen. Here we get to the meat and potatoes of Eggplant's original plotline, the trope we were all thinking of but we're too afraid to explore. An artist whose art was murder. A murderer whose murder was art. Her mission? Find him, know him, and expose to us his soul. The character engine at the heart of Eggplant enrolls its cast from the isolated atoll on which most of the story's plot takes place. After being drugged and dragged out to sea, Arda is introduced to new stakes and new faces. As she comes closer to Goshen, the subject of her interview, we begin to carve out a suspicious truth that indicates the island itself is involved in enterprises of questionable ethics. The death of her brother still haunts Arda, and Aaron's memory stabs now and again, reminding us of our hero's weakness. We slowly uncover the connection between Aaron and Goshen, and all in the unfolding context of Arda's defeat over the villain that haunted her brother and likely drove him to his grave. Nesmer's prose is interesting to me because it's not outstanding here by any special means. However, it is installed so as to not encumber the storytelling at all. I've mentioned this before about his writing. It stays out of its own way. In fact, Nesmer's voice is best enjoyed for its ability to almost disappear entirely, allowing for a very explicit and representative sandbox in terms of fiction. I enjoy his dialogue. His dialogue demonstrates technical cunning, even at times, specifically maybe attribution. His scenes are funny, if perhaps a little stagey, though, as I mentioned, he offers up single-dimensional characters for the sake of exposition. And by stagey, I don't mean any contempt. I could easily see this book adapted for the screen, and to be fair, Eggplant seems to me highly adaptable, as it were. I'd enjoy that. I studied hard through the subtext of this novel in my search for anything that might explain to me the title. I even entered a cheat code and asked the author for a hint, though he assured me he couldn't help. My favorite parts of this book were of the character Sam, a spiritual drifter who spends his chapters washing up on shore and plumbing the depths of a psychedelic, perhaps schizophrenic episode. In my heart, the namesake of this work comes from the enigmatic psychoactive material that Sam toils over, sometimes accompanied by the stranger in his room or his mind. Eggplant would therefore be the most intense trip you'll ever take, available exclusively through the atoll. Nesmer does well weaving characters together. There's an interesting depth to the relationships between siblings, particularly. Arda's strained mourning for her deceased brother in the context of possibly murdering the man responsible for his death. The opposing approaches to her presence by Toby and Eleanor Everett also reveal a thematic contrast that illustrates the sometimes perpendicular nature of family, or that of families to each other. The plot ties itself in a nice neat bow by the end, and Arda comes to terms with her role in the story. At which point the reader fits the last piece of the puzzle in and for a moment glimpses the message that Nesmer was really trying to convey, that life is innately an act of performance, whereby we all automatically become artists. Anything that can be mastered can be an art. And I think ultimately this book is about the weaponization of a fetish, and conversely the fetishization of a weapon, in this case, high art. By the work's conclusion, the reader possesses the notion that the atoll is infected, maybe. There's a strong implication that Napare, the atoll rather, is a constructed purgatory where exploiters, voyeurs, creators trap themselves in a cycle of decay and may be interpreted as a hell for failed artists or a limbo for the morally compromised. Though as deep as I would like this book to be, Eggplant does read a little at times sophomorically. As a hound for sharp prose, I'm not falling out of my chair reading Eggplant, though the work doesn't demand much from the reader, and Nesmer's voice is clear and consistent. Nesmer has a comfortable target for a debut novel. Readable, not too dense or layered, in a friendly 50,000 words. Since this book was published, Nesmer has gone on to write at least a couple other novels, and I'll be pleased to track his ongoing progress as an author. For its valiant occupation as one of Lit's most notable projects, for its adequate blending of mystery and stakes, for its amusing ensemble of every other day characters, and for its simple, humble execution, I award Eggplant by Ogden Nesmer the green. It's good. This book is more important than it is really good, but it's easy to pick up and it's harder to put down. I can safely recommend this title to anybody who enjoys independent literature, all of my spoilers notwithstanding. So there it is. Art is shit. Maybe literally. Let me leave you with a passage from Eggplant, the words of Ogden Nesmer. Arda loved painting. Before she ever actually committed brush to canvas, she saw the inherent beauty of such a thing. It was speaking beyond words. To even call it speaking was to have already reduced it to something pedestrian and forgettable, something unworthy. As an artist, one didn't merely float among the cliques, one floated above. There wasn't a need for anything else if she could paint. Arda spat one-liners and kept the wall surrounding herself very high. She didn't care who wanted in. One day soon, she had hoped, at 16, she may even dispense with the need for the one-liners, to live the socially monastic lifestyle her brother had exemplified since kindergarten. That was her idea of heaven. Aaron floated above everything. Thank you for tuning in, and a huge thank you to Augie for being 2 years patient for this. Any authors who want their book reviewed on YouTube, please send a physical copy to the address in the description. Thanks. Bye for now.